And we back. We back. Um, Good evening, beautiful people. Gilded Sages is here with yet another video. I want to say thank you first to my team for holding it down last week and doing and following through with the video that we will be pushing out later on. I don't know if it's what is it this week, Quan?
Yeah, we
Next
put it
week?
down
Next
definitely next
week?
week.
Okay. So we're gonna get that to y'all because I know I missed last week on a trip in New York, hanging out with Prophecy Films Entertainment. Shout out to them. Went to a short film festival um, that was really good. Uh, Great people, had some good eats, good time, and then had some political conversations with the I wouldn't say art community up there, but when you talk about prophecy films, and trying to help them get to a space where we are doing the political work, which is very important because it's going into our discussion this evening, and the takeaways and the lessons that we pulled away from this 2020 election. Uh, it was declared today that Biden was the winner. I don't know why it took that long. When we saw Georgia flip blue, Nevada flip blue, I think it was pretty much a wrap from there. But before we jump into it and get into it, for everybody who is watching now, can you please like the video, share the video? Um, Again, we thank everybody for their support and tuning in and being a part of the fam. Uh, it's slow, but it's definitely going to build, and it's something that we'll get into later on tonight as we discuss the aftermath of the election and what is necessary to prevent us from being in another situation such as this. Because I think the first thing that we have to look at, is that Donald Trump was a manifestation of a larger ideology. Donald Trump was a manifestation of a system that is still in place, and we'll get into later the exit polls. But Donald Trump, as you see, is a manifestation of people who believe in that for whatever reason. They do believe in Donald Trump. So I want to say congratulations to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, president and vice president, respectively. But we just gonna get into a few things about where we want to go, what we need to do, and what we also need to think about around the election. Because so for again, like back to Trump, right? Everybody's celebrating right now. Everybody is in the street. Everybody, you know, clapping it up. We got our Trump, which I understand. But I also want to just caution people and understand the track record of the opposition because when we look at the post election and we look at how, you know, and look at what most people voted for, it was a rejection of Trump and not necessarily in support of Joe Biden. People mistakenly say that they support Joe Biden, but when you have the conversation, you soon see and understand that, you know, in most cases, most people did not fare either way for any candidate. But just the fact that Trump was repulsive. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the exit polls because I think the exit polls told us a lot in terms of the conversation that we are having. So while I'm putting this on the screen, man, Quan, tell me your thoughts, man,
Um,
on the post election and what do you think, with the ousting of Trump? How do you feel knowing that he is gone and knowing that he may be like lame duck? And just what are some of the things that you felt as things were declared, and how you see the next steps of 2021?
So it's funny because I've been watching a lot of older films lately,
Hmm.
and what you see is a pattern when it comes to certain Republican presidents. So it was always a hearkening for, oh, black folk, we got to get Nixon out of office.
Hmm.
Oh, we got to get Reagan out of office. Oh, we got to get so and so out of office. And it's just like, we have to get out of this cycle of constantly trying to solve issues or be the superheroes for the American populace, because it's always the same calling card. It's let's scare as many black folk as possible in order to sway the vote. And we rarely get any kind of reciprocation from any of those initiatives, because we've been saying the same thing since Nixon.
And I want to jump in there real quick because you said something that was very important about our votes being swayed. And I want to just tell everybody, yes, our votes do matter. So you should vote. It is not productive in what we're trying to do to say that your votes don't matter. But what I will say in that nuance and what you mean and what I think you're getting at in terms of us being swayed is how our vote, particularly as African Americans, the Black community, is manipulated and then not rewarded with actual tangibles. And we definitely gonna have some bad critiques. Y'all said, look, y'all got let him win first. No, no, no. He won. Let's go. So because I have my issues with him in terms of how he's already started out in terms of his messaging and his rhetoric. And for those who don't think that rhetoric is important when you're talking about politics, rhetoric is your largest tool in your toolkit because it creates snapshots, it creates the narrative, and as politicians, the capacity for you to be able to orate, articulate to command or omit is highly, highly very important. So with that being said, let me go ahead and bring up these election polls. Um, so right now, I don't. Let me make this a little bit bigger for everybody so we can see it, because the conversation again is about Donald Trump. And great that Donald Trump is out, but let's just talk about how it broke down, because how it broke down for me was important, and I'll just preface this, was because it showed and highlighted, like you said, the issue that has been a recurring issue over time, in terms of, even though Donald Trump is who he is, we know who he is, we know his ideology, his rhetoric, his stances, but it did not stop the tale of two United States from being told. Because as we see again, we see two very contrasted sides in how the election turned out. And these numbers were, for my personal comfort, too close.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at, male or female, we look at, 49% for Trump, 48 for Biden, then you got 43 for Trump, and then 56. That's overall. And then you got the ethnic heritage breakdown. Um, and you start to see where white is at 57%, the who's still in the majority. So what I first initially thought when I saw the numbers, I was like, everybody's out here telling men and patriarchy and all of that stuff to do the work, it was interesting to see the breakdown of, Trump led with, he increased his numbers with every other group except white men. And I think that goes to say, white men have been heavily held accountable. And I think as a result of that, some of them may get it, some of them may be saving face. But I see also in that number, white women go up. And let me see if it's reflected in this one, because I've been looking at a few, and this one may not have it. Oh yes, it does. So again, that 55% is up from like 51.
Wow.
So, and then you had black women who increased by 4%. Let me see. So yeah, this 8% is an increase from 4. This 18 is an increase from 12. Yeah, and they don't have the increased margins. But what it highlighted is, I don't think there's accountability going around to everybody outside of this whole narrative of white male patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think people really consider that white women benefit from,
Mm-hmm.
because they are attached at the family unit. So the money, even if they make less, that money is still circulated within their households,
Exactly.
adjacent to, and not even adjacent to, in companionship with the white male. And
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about generally speaking, because when you start getting into the nuance, um, we can all bring nuances into a conversation. But I think when we talk about this data, we see that the majority of white men and women still opted to vote for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And let me see. You had Hispanic Latinos at 32% for Donald Trump, 66 for Joe Biden, 31% for Asian, 63% for Joe Biden. That was 31 for Donald Trump. My apologies. And then you had other. I think those were a lot of down ballot protesters.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Especially in Georgia, in my opinion.
and I think what you're going to see, and I think what we can take from that though is when we talk about building coalitions and moving forward in terms of how we view people through identity politics, I think we have to get rid of that with the understanding that people, because you look like a person, isn't necessarily married to the same ideology. And
Mm-hmm.
what I saw from that was, I think there was a mix, because I don't think everybody actually supports Donald Trump. I think what happens in some of these cases where people voting for Donald Trump is that it is a direct protest to what the establishment has given us in a lot of cases on
Mm-hmm.
both sides. So it's more of like, nah, Donald Trump was bad for business, and I want to see America collapse. And we'll get into it later in terms of what can possibly happen, if we have these same centrist, incremental policy solutions that don't necessarily solve issues and the catastrophe of that.
Mm-hmm.
But to stay on the polls, the exit polls, and how they tell a story that isn't making the headlines, because of course everybody is talking about how Biden defeated Trump, but I think it's interesting in the sense that there was even this level of ambiguity of who would win.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about Donald Trump, as repulsive as he is, I think Joe Biden is equally repulsive. And on top of that, people just opted out. So what should have been a blowout ultimately came down to a close race, because that being one side, the other side just being America is racist.
Yeah.
And so when you have people who talk about, oh, well, I don't know how all of those people voted for Donald Trump. I don't get it. I don't understand. This is America.
Yeah.
What part don't you understand about, despite Donald Trump being voted out of office, we still have people who are staunch racists. And even if you aren't a staunch racist, the way that your capital, your money moves and calcifies is in support of a Donald Trump esque American capitalistic system.
Yeah.
Because you're making decisions based on I want to increase my financial position, not understanding that financial system, the economic system is attached to the exploitation that was birthed out of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I say slavery is because it was refined and commodified. These things were commodified. Yes, in all respect in regard to the Indians, that was pure brutality. But what we see with slavery is the commodification of brutality
Mm-hmm.
over generations, the transition of the commodification, the adaptation of markets when we talk about the exploitation that was built on top of slavery. And so, even when we talk about, and I'll let you answer this after, I thought it was interesting to see black men potentially being blamed
Mm-hmm.
uh, for the when Trump had started, getting his numbers. We took the blame as a subgroup, black men, because
Mm-hmm.
as we know, black women, and let's be honest, women overall, whether white or black, vote at higher rates than males.
Mm-hmm.
That's just fact. But what we saw was nobody blame any other group openly at the same level of this with the same level of vulgarity,
Mm-hmm.
being called like the weakest link and all of these different things. And for me, it was interesting because we still, as black men, came in under every other group.
But I mean, okay, as a politician, I'm gonna raise this question. Name one piece of legislation that has ever helped out specifically the black male community. And the fact that you have to think that long says a lot about our position in policy. Because there are policies that you could argue that have risen up a lot of other groups, but when it came to black males, the only thing that I can think of is criminal justice reform. And
And not
that
even that,
and that
because
in and
that
of
was
itself
because
is
that
an
was
issue.
half-assed.
Yeah, but I'm
And
saying, but that in and of itself is the issue because all you think about helping when it comes to us is the criminal justice system. And that's it.
yeah, and with that being said, I agree. And
So when we speak about the apathy, so-called apathy of black men, you have to speak on that with the sense of a government who has never written nor supported black men specifically in the last what
ever.
ever. I'm just trying to
So
be,
no,
you know what I
I'm gonna hold you there. I'm gonna
mean?
hold you there. I'm glad you pivoted there because I jotted down. I actually wanted to bring that up because with the voter apathy, I want to warn people um, in the sense that do not. This is not a victory right now. This is a win in a larger battle.
Mhm.
This is a battle within a war. What we have to move into and understand, because you hit the nail on the head, because I think some of those black male voters, as I mentioned, were in protest of just, you know what? Nobody really cares about us, not even our women. They side with the establishment. And again, you can disagree or not disagree. This is how a lot of black men feel.
Mhm.
I know people don't necessarily listen to us in that way, but this is just the sentiment that I've heard. And I talk to people on average like maybe like 20 people a day now since COVID. It's probably dropped. But with that being said, is we run the risk, and this is why I think it's so important for everybody to not view this as a victory, is because there is a potential for a greater catastrophe here. Going back to the sentiment and the understanding that most people ran against Trump and not in support of Biden because of we've seen the establishment on both sides halfway deliver. And when we talk about Democrats, we're talking about incremental delivery in the way that it's done to create the facade of meritocracy. Because we all that narrative is collapsing. I'm happy it's collapsing.
Yes,
because meritocracy is not a thing. But if Democrats and Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, do not act on and deliver formidable policies that challenge the moment outside of the political discourse, talking about whether that be the pandemic for the housing crisis that we are looking at, or the eviction crisis that we are looking at, or we talking about global warming. There's a myriad of issues that went un I wouldn't even say unspoken on, but didn't get spoken on enough as a result of Donald Trump being in office.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, if they continue down this path of incrementalism, in 4 years, because let's understand, every politician, every elected official runs on the failure of the incumbents.
Yes, that's an absolute fact.
You are trying to solve a solution, or you're presenting a solution to the people as to why you are a better choice. So, with that being said, understand that Trump ran on Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for better, what Obama did not do. Whether you want to agree or not on what he did, what he didn't do, understand that when we talk about the consensus of the people, it is about how people are perceiving their experience.
Yes.
So when we talk about Black men, African American men specifically, if the Democrats, and I think it will spill over into more groups, because I think the other groups that we mentioned, like Latinos, and they tried to break it, they tried to deconstruct it and compartmentalize. Yes. So the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans, again, I hear you, break it down, but understand, because I'm all for that. I'm all for better aggregated data. Please understand that. I'm all for people in the deconstruction of race and talking about the ethnic heritage, the rituals, the traditions that come from a particular group, because that is what tells me how that group moves and what that group has the interest in. But before I let you go, I'm gonna let you jump in. I wanted to just finish and say that if they are not going to deliver, we might see a higher turnout in whatever candidate may run after this on the GOP end. Because we'll get into later what I feel about how he disrespected the left wing of the party with his Republican statements. But it is possible that if he does not deliver, or if they do not deliver during these 4 years, that a lot of people, you will see more protest votes. Go ahead.
And just to piggyback on what you just said about the groups. So I want to really get into these groups, because what's funny is during this time, during election time, it's all about specificity. Oh, these groups are separate. We're not this, we're this. But when it comes to advocating for policy overall, anything that you say towards the group now becomes an indictment on you. But when it's time to elect the president, or elect or when it comes to these voting exit polls, you see how they are splintered, or how they separate themselves and how they vote But when they're pushing for specific policies, now we're all a group. We're all one because we have to get our policies passed. So I feel like going forward, people are going to have to be real particular in how we do the so-called coalition building.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, when it's about pushing policies, everybody wants to be included. We want to get everybody on board in order to get policies pushed. We want to get black women involved in being a part of pushing for, the Latinos to get their policies pushed. They include everyone when it's time for policy, but when voting comes, you see a very succinct actual turnout. They don't vote as if they were in cohesion with every other group. They vote their own interests.
That's a good point. And I think that's where we as a group, people unfortunately have referred to me as an elitist and a coon and all kinds of other things, which is so amazing to me. Uh, but we have to have and impose a standard because what you're talking about is interest, consensus around interest. So we as African Americans, the problem is we just double down on coalitions and we use that as our first identity because we understand in part that African Americans aren't respected overall. So whether you're a woman, you place your womanhood first, whether depending on your sexuality, you place your sexuality first, or depending on your religion, you place your religion first. And we use all of these modifiers to black because we're trying to navigate a system and we understand as African Americans that everybody in most cases are anti-African American. So we use that modifier to other ourselves so that we don't get blocked out economically or we don't get blocked out of a coalition because the thing is you're being too black now or too African American now.
Mm-hmm.
Because that term black is a very troubling, it rubs me kind of the wrong way. Because as we see, our interests don't align in a lot of cases.
Exactly.
Especially when we start talking about as to the number and proportions of how people align or don't align. And I don't have anything against a particular group, but what I need for African Americans to begin to understand is that we have to accept things for what they are. We have to accept what we see. We have to acknowledge that half of the country still voted for whiteness. And whiteness, what I mean by whiteness is institution, tradition, behavior, a certain set of algorithms that bring a certain set of outcomes. And people voted for that and whatever other reasons they have.
So when it comes time for policies to be passed, we need to remember the fact that, hey, when you went to the polls, you weren't, you know what I mean? You were Black Lives Matter outside protesting. But at the same time, when you went to these polls, your voting habits did not align with what all of these things, these performative actions that you did. How could you be pro George Floyd or stand by Breonna Taylor or this, that, and the third, and your voting habits say otherwise?
Because people disconnect themselves from experience and voting habits. As we saw with 50 Cent, 50 Cent, who is African American, because he is disconnected and capital moves him now, and not necessarily his values and traditions and culture, capital moves him. So it doesn't necessarily connect. And that's where the disconnect happens in a lot of cases. When you talk about people who aren't necessarily um, invested in that, it's easy to say, well, this thing makes money. Let me do this thing, despite what it may do to other people. And I think we also have to begin to understand that when we talk about policy, uh, we have to be very specific. Joe Biden put out a policy for the diasporans that was very specific and touched on Nigerians specifically and touched on continental Africans specifically. But I'll do an episode where we break down his policies because a lot of people, again, he won now. So we gonna break it down and we gonna tell you why it's garbage in
Mm-hmm.
terms of he used the word African American in his summary and abstract in terms of the issue that he was discussing. But when you go down further and when you look at the solutions, the words then become minorities or black or people of color and things of that sort when you go into the solutions and the recommendations of what is being proposed outside to support or in support of the issue that you were just speaking on as it was African Americans. And so I think a lot of people miss that because it's real loose language. But talking about Joe Biden, talking about lift every voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there were some things he said, and I had posted, his willingness to court Republicans for the cabinet. I don't necessarily agree. I know people want to move politically and want to speak around the strategy, and a strategy that I'll say is very old when we talk about trying to build a quote unquote, as Obama put it, um, as the book as well, a team of rivals. And again, I'm not against bipartisanship in any shape, form, or fashion. Um, but I just want to go on record and say that when you talk about Joe Biden coming out and saying that, I need you to say before you say that to thank AOC, who I don't necessarily support or agree with, but she put in work for him. Bernie Sanders, who I don't necessarily support or agree with, who put in work for him. Stacey Abrams, who I don't necessarily agree with, and put in work for him.
And
You have, go ahead.
and overall, black people.
Yeah, and we're gonna get there. But you have a myriad of different factors who enabled them to get this victory. And I get the whole idea of trying to signal, but it's when people assess things, they assess it absent of the track record. It would be different if we were talking about a Joe Biden who did not, again, we're out of the election cycle. He not only signed on to the crime bill, he took the lead in building the crime bill and pushed even Republicans, Ronald Reagan at the time, to go further because Ronald Reagan thought it was far. This is the same Joe Biden who has the issue with or had the whole thing with Anita Hill
Mm-hmm.
and Clarence Thomas. This is the same Joe Biden who vetoed Medicaid for all. This is the same man who is vehemently opposed to reparations for African Americans, despite, again, saying on the floor as he was presenting his crime bill that, yes, we understand that we made them this way, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to lock them up. And we're still suffering through that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I need people to do and understand in that is that you can't assess that man and his comments as it relates to Republicans on an island. All of
Mm-hmm.
those things matter because this is also the man who worked with Strom Thurmond, a staunch racist.
Mm-hmm.
And now, again, this is the same man who also said whatever her middle name is,
Go.
Corbett, the Supreme Court judge who just got smashed in by the
Mm-hmm.
GOP
Mm-hmm.
in record time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Record setting
And
time.
guess what? Every Republican involved with that reelected. Landslide victories.
And with that, you are saying, and you've said even prior to while you were on the campaign trail, I don't think people really caught it or they didn't speak on it because everybody was so focused on defeating Trump, that you were courting GOP cabinet members.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes out, I'm just going to pull up the article really, really, really quickly to kind of help frame it. And this is from the Ixios. And it's GOP Senate wins wreak havoc on Biden's transition plans. And the landscape is a little different considering how the states turn. But it says why it matters. The new Senate political math could dash the ambitions of some Democrats, including those who have clashed with Republicans. It could push Biden to go with more centrist options, like Lowell Bernard for Treasury or Tony Blinken for State. Susan Rice and Stacey Abrams could be early casualties, depending on Mitch McConnell's posture.
Landslide victory.
Landslide.
68, 69%.
Landslide. But let me finish though. A source close to, but hold on, before I skip there, it could open up paths to senators like Chris Coons, who could benefit from a tradition of senatorial courtesy for quick confirmations of nominees in his ranks. And then a source tells McConnell, ACOs, a Republican Senate will work with Biden on centrist nominees, but no radical progressives or ones who are controversial with conservatives.
Mm.
Hmm. The Biden agenda would severely be restricted by GOP control, the sources added. Is going to be armed camps.
Mm.
The big picture, all right? This political reality could result in Biden having a more centrist cabinet. And what did we talk about earlier? If they don't deliver to the people, we could see more protest votes. We could
Mm.
see more voter apathy. We could see all of those things. And again, this is all speculation, people. I'm just saying these are the things I was thinking about as I am watching the unfolding of the craziest election since I've been alive. I thought it was very interesting, um, especially
Yeah, 2000 was a little bit lit, but not like this.
no, not like, especially because I know more
Yeah.
than I did in 2000. It's very, very interesting. Then it says it gives Biden a ready excuse to reject left of center candidates like Senator Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, who have enthusiastic backing of progressives. So that's like the squad and all of those people that people
Mm-hmm.
love. So I think those are great points
Mm-hmm.
because when we talk about it, we have to talk about America's political system in a total reality. And we have to talk about and anchor the political philosophies and ideologies in their appropriate spectrum. Biden is a center right candidate. Trump, the GOP, is far, 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 far right
Mm-hmm.
based on American legacy. Our founders were just demons and heathens. I don't even want to put them on a political spectrum. But to be fair, they're far right.
Oh yeah.
So when we see people like Elizabeth Warren is like a center left.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are moderate. Even AOC, I'll give her. I'll say she's center left because she's very conservative in a lot of different things outside of her own. What is that? The what plan did she? I
Green
forget
New
that.
Deal.
Yeah, the Green New Deal. I forgot that fast. But when we look at that and we see that, the issue that I have with that is exactly what they talked about in terms of Biden. First off, not acknowledging the people who helped just put him in office
Mm-hmm.
openly. Openly. You
Mm-hmm.
need to be super attentive in how you communicate with us. Because without us, you would have not won
Nope.
at all.
Nope. Them big cities carried him to victory.
Victory. Stacey Abrams, Georgia flip blue. When I woke up and saw it, I was like, oh my God.
God.
I never thought I would see that. But with that being said, I think it's highly disrespectful when people are like, again, oh yeah, play the game. But at what expense? At what expense? And I'm going to go on a small diatribe here because we saw what the GOP was. We saw who the GOP is. We know who the GOP has been and who they always will be. And your track record in working with the GOP, even when America was staunchly racist, and they have shown that they are staunch racist, you are still willing to throw an olive branch to them. As a black man, it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me afraid because I know that when you make those concessions, again, who campaign did we hear from? Oh, he couldn't do anything because of the Republicans, even with the Democratic Senate and House.
And he said that out
Oh,
his mouth.
he couldn't do anything. Oh, who did we hear that from?
Us.
No, Obama.
Yep.
The Obama administration, who also went in with this type of philosophy, was gutted. Mitch McConnell got on TV and said and acknowledged him undermining the judge seats that Obama could have seated so that the GOP could do it. Obama compromised on not DACA. What's the not Medicare for all?
The
Obamacare. Even though it's not really Obamacare, but he compromised on that, and they were actively working to unravel it.
mm-hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily super tedious or hard because when you give people access to your administration, you give them access to not only the institutional power, but the intellectual capital that comes along with being a politician. Because, see, being in politics and being a political leader is about being a thought leader. So your ideas are your capital. Your policy is your capital.
Mm-hmm. Can I fit in one more?
Go ahead.
I think that we really are going to have to examine when it comes to Biden, not only that past stuff, but his vice presidency run. This is the man that oversaw the Recovery Act. And I read an article the other day where after the Recovery Act, you had bankers who should have been in prison who are now leading in their sectors, in their respective sectors. The largest banks have quadrupled their profits since the Recovery Act. How is it that you are a vice president you could oversee people who are actually suffering, losing their homes. All of these things are going on. And the bankers are the people that benefit the most out of your policies. How is that dynamic able to exist and you be rewarded in a sense with a presidency run?
I'm gonna last part back just a little bit.
So if you oversee a policy that was promoted because the Recovery Act was for all of America.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the statistics of who benefited the most, it was the bankers who should have been on the chopping block for selling the collateralized, unsubsidized loans. Those institutions got incentivized and now have quadrupled their profits from '08 to now.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you able to oversee that type of a policy? And that's why I think Democrats have suffered so much since that, because they were not able to deliver on the Recovery Act and bring anything towards real people. They have not delivered for real people in a long, long time. And it becomes hard because we know Republicans aren't going to deliver for us. But when you, Democrats, aren't delivering for real people, when you're the reason why big industries are gaining record profits, because that didn't have anything to do with Republicans, that was a Democratic policy that oversaw the expansion of industry over the plight of real people. So I believe that we're seeing the Democrats embrace policy over people just as much as the GOP.
Yeah, they are both economically, especially conservative, both parties. And I think what we have to, acknowledge is that both parties, um, I gotta put this again, going back to back, both parties come together to make concessions. And usually, when you look at the GOP or when you talk about the GOP and you assess who they are, because I think a lot of people forget that they are the grand old party for a reason. They're the grand old party. And when you talk about like the history of America and you talk about the Gilded Ages of America, when you talk about the GOP, understand that they have an exuberant amount of wealth. The people who have wealth, even if they don't necessarily agree with those values, are usually going to move in line and in tandem with that party because they protect wealth. Both parties do. Um, and I think it's unfortunate that we see that time and time and again in terms of not having that follow through. And that's why I brought up that's definitely why I brought up the point of like, look, if it happens again, after we saved y'all from the quote unquote existential crisis,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna need black people to wake up and stop being enablers.
Yes.
Because at this point we are an enabler. But I wanted to touch on something because you had mentioned deliverables. And let's talk about a few things that have been, you know, on backseat because of Donald Trump. And I want to first start off with African Americans absolutely need and deserve reparations. Our wealth was scheduled to hit zero by 2050 before COVID, and we'll probably hit that sooner, especially considering Trump might sabotage the economy before he leaves out of office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's also talk about the eviction crisis that is still looming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I hope that either we see large infusions of cash to absolve both parties, or that somebody or that they step in terms of policy solutions to meet the needs of both sides in terms of realtors who are renting out or leasing property, and also owners who have defaulted on mortgages in large numbers.
Yeah.
Um, that is going to be very pivotal, and this is why we don't need incrementalism right now, and why incrementalism is going to be the death of America,
Mm-hmm.
because it will uphold the status quo, which is also falling, but then it will allow another insidious individual who may not be as outspoken as Trump, because again, what this election has shown us is that people agree with racism.
Mm-hmm.
So we might get a person who understands that he does not or she does not have to say those things out loud, but they still move in that way. And this is why I'm saying that I do not need us to be put to sleep by Biden in quote unquote fake normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
It will never be normal after what we've seen
Never.
transpire. We saw the DNC cheat openly against Bernie. We saw Michael Bloomberg come into a race, and you have all of these people talking about white male patriarchy, but they continue to support white male patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to believe in proximity. They continue to believe in, if we are more around them and if we speak to them, and that's when I say we, I mean African Americans, because people of color, I think they understand whiteness more than we do. Um, and with that being said, I think that when you have that dynamic, we have to really focus on being specific moving forward.
Very much so.
Because again, there are a myriad of issues, and I believe that outside of this, because you mentioned Black Lives Matter earlier,
Mm-hmm.
but Black Lives Matter was co-opted for votes. Because let's also remember that Obama condemned Black Lives Matter during his administration when Joe Biden was the VP.
Yep.
This time it was embraced because, again, we see state sanctioned police violence that has been gone, that is America.
Yes. It's
It's
been in
not a result
every.
of Trump.
It's been in every administration.
And so I think we as African Americans have to do some real soul searching in terms of what we think about
Mm-hmm.
America and what we think about as plausible solutions,
Mm-hmm.
and really need to understand that a lot of the things that a lot of people are talking about have been tried
It,
before. They understand the vastness of what we're up against,
yeah.
because we're also talking about a highly calcified America when it relates to wealth. Like, it just came out that again, California on its own is a top five economy
Yeah. I could believe it.
globally.
I could believe it.
So that means that again, a state within a nation is worth more than a bunch of nations themselves. They top five.
Yeah.
Top five. Not top 20, not top 50, not top 100. Top five.
Mm-hmm.
So we also have to think about how wealth is going to hold wealth accountable and not just acquiesce to wealth. Because as much as people love like Maxine Waters and everybody who just talk, AOC and everybody who just talk, when it come down to it, are you going to sacrifice the bag?
Exactly. Because they come to DC all the time. You know what I mean? I think it's been just like a year round business trip. They come there, they get a little talking to, slap on the wrist, and then they go back and continue on doing their same business practices. How many times are we gonna see Mark Zuckerberg in the White House putting on a performance and then leaving and continuing to do what Mark Zuckerberg does? Like Jeff Bezos was so gangster, I don't think he showed up.
Yeah, because in the end, again,
he's like, kiss my ass. I only watch the Post.
there is no real accountability. And like when you have again, as bad as Donald Trump was, you got a person in Biden who was on a campaign trail, and I don't know if he still feels the same way. But you said that you would veto Medicare for all if it came across your desk.
During the pandemic?
During the pandemic.
Wow.
During the pandemic. And this is why I'm telling people, no, this man is dangerous. Because he doesn't, what he may not speak on, he still may feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, a lot of white people voted against Trump just to protect their narrative of being the innocence that comes along with whiteness,
mm-hmm.
the advantage and privilege that comes along with whiteness. And Trump was threatening that because he shows what the family dynamic is.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of people who, even though they may not agree, they support those people still with that ideology inside of their family.
Mm-hmm.
We have Elizabeth Warren on record saying that. Because again, you want to talk about Republicans as part of your rhetoric on the campaign trail, but your brother's a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to do the whole, but he doesn't support Trump though.
Or your husband.
Okay. It's not just one all like that. But the whole veto Medicare for all, that's bad for business. That's not where it's at. And we need to, hopefully the left wing of the party actually does what they say they're going to do in terms of trying to move the needle and not just play the game to access more power. So for everybody who's watching the video right now, like, share, comment. Again, we appreciate y'all for coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Leave any comments. If you want to call in, feel free. It is in the description with the Zoom number. Again, this is not about having a dialogue with oneself. We would love to have these conversations and raise these conversations. So again, it's a common thing.
Yeah. And one thing we have to divorce politicians and speak on them only for their policies. We have to divorce the politician from their policy. We have to see those separate, because what happens is certain people get absolved, but the policies remain. Like, for example, let's go back a bit. So Bush comes in, Bush's policies, no child left behind. You could argue, and I've studied these things, you could argue that contributed to the achievement gap that we have amongst Black and colored people, in comparison to white people, because of the fact that No Child Left Behind forced a lot of schools to compete amongst one another for funding that was once available to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have insert in Obama and those policies. You have a Recovery Act that ravaged, that did not do enough for Black people. We need to be honest. Who did the housing crisis affect the most? Those poorest among us who get the subprime loans marketed to us the most. And what was the Recovery Act supposed to do? Bring about a solution to those things. And what it did, it gave us a few stimulus checks. I think it was like $1,000. It bailed out the auto industry,
mm-hmm.
and it largely benefited the bankers.
Hmm.
It largely benefited the bankers. So we have to begin to see, and going forward, if we're really going to talk about being serious with politics, the vote is like 1%. We need to see policies, who's affected, who wins, and who loses. Because if you follow the policy enough, you will see who the winners and the losers are on both sides.
Um,
And you'll see who constantly comes out with the shorter end of the stick. And you'll see why so many people disengage completely.
I agree to some extent. I would give it more than 1%. I get where you was coming from though.
Yeah.
It is a very small, minute part in terms of voting. But this is what I, tell people in terms of the things that actually matter. A lot of people think it's this very grandiose idea of like, oh, what's the solution? What's the solution? What's the solution? I'll tell you this. I think one policy solution, especially when we talk about Biden and we talk about him being the chief general of war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
What I would like to see is as the cannabis industry begins to explode, I need more criminal justice reform, as you mentioned before, because I don't think it has been done in a way that is community oriented. Because I have issue with just bringing a people out without the community being stabilized, because that creates further stress, further destabilization, because you have a lot of people who don't have the economic access, and you have a lot of people who are struggling. So bringing in an extra person who has not been geared to navigate the 21st century and 2020, 2021 America uh, is going to pose some issues as we move forward. So I would like to see they go much further on that in a way of, again, ramping up from the federal level, releasing more petty drug offenses, and but also creating pathways for African Americans specifically to enter the cannabis industry. And so, like, even for quote unquote the infrastructure academy that we got in DC, it's like, look, man, this stuff is happening at the collegiate level. We can bring people in and actually give them the training and the tools, and then subsidize based on them going through a program so that they can enter into these industries. Because these industries and the policies that were put in place have destroyed our communities. So let's have some ownership. Let's have mechanisms where, again, you can go through the program and you can go get the licensures and things of that nature, and then receive grants and funds from the city to be able to access and develop and build a cannabis industry. And then for those who are not African Americans, we can put in stipulations that say, look, if you are going to run this dispensary or whatever, because you are not African American and we destroyed them as a community, I need you to, or I will give you subsidies to hire and bring on African Americans, especially those, again, you may get a few extra points if you bring in those who have been directly afflicted by it. So that's a shout out to my returning citizens fan.
Yeah.
Because that has to be done. Because I'm sick of seeing, when we talk about recidivism, we got to talk about being provided opportunities to not backtrack into the environment that you were in.
Yeah. And profiting from it. Because what you have as a great idea, the backdrop of that is the fact that just getting the permit in and of itself is big business.
Yeah.
It's almost like landing a big
It's
contract.
thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and it's only going up. So as that industry explodes, the competition amongst the big companies for these permits has driven the prices for it up, and it prices out the people trying to get in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? The process to try to get into those things, it's almost as if, because I watched something on it, you have to almost partner with a larger corporation.
Yeah, that's how opportunity zones really work.
In order to
and why they don't work.
Yeah, in order to even get the permit. You know what I'm saying? And then what you have to do in terms of capacity and scaling up to maintain having the permit is another obstacle for just the average person who's trying to run a business, because it costs more to keep the permit than it does for you to actually turn a profit in the industry as it is now. So he's going to have to go to war with those big industries to bring that kind of policy, which I just don't see Biden being the type of person to really rock the boat as much as need be for that industry to include. Because it's I want to say, outside of technology, weed is number two. It's number two.
It's definitely up and coming, but I need, again, concessions to be made specifically for African Americans.
Yeah,
and
I
look,
agree, though.
and look here. You know, I don't necessarily agree with the whole aggregation of black women and black men because we exist as families. But let me say this, man. Hold on. Black women, y'all don't get what the fuck y'all deserve. Demand it in the same way you willing to tear up shit any other day for not getting what you deserve. I need that same energy.
Yeah.
Cause y'all just saved these bum ass things. Hold on. Black women just saved these bum ass niggas. Black women. I would much rather prefer that we move as a family unit, but at the very least, if y'all don't get y'all shit, I'm gonna be mad because it's disrespect. And I know people don't necessarily like the radicals, quote unquote, but I'm offended for you if you don't get your shit. I'm mad because you don't get your shit. Because you're not gonna tell me you the backbone of the Democratic Party, but when you come to them to say, "Oh yeah, I need money for my family," because even though I'm a black woman, I gotta manage families, right? Women are attached to families; they have babies and all of those kind of things. So if if you're not taking care of black babies and black men on top of that, that's a problem. But at the very least, get what's yours.
Yes.
Because I hope y'all don't get shitted on. I expect them to shit on y'all. I hope they don't. But if they do, if you're looking for quote unquote protect black women, if you're looking for people to do that, y'all will have to team up with some radicals.
Yeah.
Because, and not even radicals, I don't like that term. I'm not radical. I respond to radicalism that is America. America is the radical one. America is the one that has destroyed my family, that has destroyed my women, that have destroyed my peers, that have destroyed my colleagues, that have destroyed my culture, my community. America at large. And again, that ranges from white people, Asian people, black people, Irish people, Scottish people, whatever. All of y'all participate in America the same way, to matriculate, so you are at odds with the African American community, even if you are African American.
Mm-hmm. And I'll double down on that. What that means, black women, you should not be standing behind the Latin community while they get immigration reform. You should not be standing behind the Native Americans while they get their reform. You should not be standing behind the LGBTQIA community while they get their reform. You, since you saved Biden, should catapult in front
Everybody.
and get yours first. Because as you can see, what did the Latin community do? Go to the numbers, look them up.
Hold on, do I still got it up?
Look them up. What did that community do?
I mean, to be fair,
what did these communities do when it was time to get the person in policy that would forward their policies?
To be fair, this is what I will say. I actually appreciate how other communities move in terms of segmenting their votes out, just despite it being anti-African American, because they go for their own interests.
And I understand that.
But to your point, this is where these coalitions fall apart. Because again, I don't see people advocating for Black American women and African American women in the same way.
Exactly.
It just doesn't necessarily happen. It's unfortunate. I am a believer that African American women are overly loyal to people that are trash.
Exactly.
Whether that range from a mother all the way down onto a colleague. I feel like people are overly loyal to people who consistently show that they are not in the interest of you.
Exactly. And they blatantly put everything in front of your own interests. Like, why is a Black woman's livelihood put on the back burner for immigration reform?
Because I'm glad you asked that question. Before we segue into this last point, like the video, share the video, comment, please. Because again, I don't necessarily want to talk to myself. If you want to call in and Zoom, I got everything pulled up. The link is in the description. So check it out, please. But with that being said, though, policy is personnel, fam. And this is the issue that I have with, again, going back to the whole Biden bringing in Republicans or whistling to them first, is we know America is heavily divided along many lines. I have my intersectionalists who believe in intersectionality, though I think it's a great social theory. It doesn't play out in the way that it is, I don't want to say fair, but what happens is we believe in intersectionality until we get to African Americans.
Yeah.
That's when it's like, oh no, we're not going down that road.
Yeah.
You can go down whatever road. But with that being said, it's like we have to begin to understand that outside of Donald Trump, people fill positions. People are themselves. People believe in what they believe in. People influence. Government is your neighbors. With that being said, we have to understand that when it comes down to personnel and when we are selecting personnel, that those interests must be aligned.
Mm-hmm.
Not at just the sake of let's do this because it's quote unquote tradition. All tradition has been broken.
Oh yeah.
I particularly don't care about tradition at this point. Don't. Everybody has shown me that nobody cares about tradition
Mm-hmm.
until it's time to appeal to people. When it's time to secure wealth and power, tradition. Oh, don't
What?
we agree on that? I don't care. Cool, whatever. It is what it is. I'm moving in a different way. But now we're going to have to, again, understand that these decisions are being made by everyday people. It's not always the elected official who moves the needle. It's not always the person who has the most followers who moves the needle.
Mm-hmm.
And with what we're moving into and how we're navigating, especially as African Americans, we have to be cognizant, and I think you mentioned this earlier, of who's who and what they believe in. Because it can't just be brown no more. We clearly see from the polling results, brown people got a little white supremacy up in them.
Hey, it is what it is.
And if they don't get what they want, they're willing to go with that white supremacy.
It is what it is.
That's against anti-African American interests.
Oh, but they'll bring us along when it comes to their suffering.
That's because when you talk about America,
Oh, we
you
suffer
have
just
to.
like you. We suffer just like you.
Mm-mm, not at all.
It's black and brown. We suffer just like you. Until voting time comes.
No, not until voting time comes. All the time.
Well, yeah. Well, voting
Because
is
how they move overall. Again, personnel is policy. They move like that all the time. They move in self interest all the time. They talk about certain things all the time. And we have to get to, again, not trying to model because we can't model ourselves after another group, but that is one takeaway that I think that we can apply to ourselves in terms of understanding like, no, we are who we are and they are who they are.
mm-hmm.
I don't hate you, but we not the same.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned earlier about an article that came out from Associated Press
Yeah.
about labeling Kamala Harris as a black Asian what?
It was like a South Asian, the first black and South Asian.
See, that's bundling. Because again, you can't be both. Because what we have to do when we talk about race in America and moving forward is understand that black and white is a manifestation and a creation of America.
Mm-hmm.
Blackness and whiteness is inherently owned by native or native white Americans and native black Americans. Descendants of American slavers versus descendants of American slavery. That's white and black.
Mm-hmm.
It has permeated throughout the globe, but they function very, very differently, especially when we talk about how they are attached to the economics and legal apparatuses of America
Mm-hmm.
and how they influence those things. Again, when we talk about the stock market, when we talk about the electoral college, when we talk about our very foundational mechanisms that keep America running, are all built on models from slavery.
Yes. I completely agree.
It's not even a thing that
Yeah,
you can't
I mean it's a
because it's fact.
it's a given fact. And like
challenge me, please look it up.
and we have to think more in terms of survival. Like, yes, I understand that there are other groups that are doing and suffering through what they're suffering through. But us as black people, we cannot no longer look at the suffering of other people at the sake of our own needs. We can't do that anymore. Black people, we have needs. We have unmet needs, in my opinion. And those other groups need to make their claims and not reel us into what their situations are because we have in-house needs as well. How am I supposed to fix community or fix issues within our community when I have to be on board with immigration, when I have to be on board with the LG, like all of these agendas have nothing to do with fixing race,
Nope.
with putting food on black people's tables. It has zero to do with any of those things.
Because when you talk about black people, the current definition is everybody black.
Exactly. But that doesn't put food on our tables. So why are we spending our political capital getting behind all of these agendas that have zero to do with us as a people? Yes, I don't want to see Latin people in cages. But
They don't care about what we going
there's
through.
black folks in Flint, Michigan right now whose water is still
And
infested.
I saw people who was mad that Flint voted red. Fuck y'all think they was gonna do? This nigga Obama came to Flint, drank some water, or not even drink some water, disrespected them, fam. And people expect like, no, people not gonna keep voting for y'all.
There's black people that are living by corporations that dump pollutants into the community. And we're worried about immigration reform. We're worried about rights for LGBT community. And that's not to be disrespectful, but at the end of the day, for a lot of us, we need to get our priorities in line and you need to worry about your next meal because your survival is more important than everybody else's agenda. Period. I don't see how you could put your next meal in front of or behind someone else getting theirs.
Black people, African Americans are very loving people. And with that being said, I don't see that we have any calls coming in. Let me see. No, we don't have any calls coming in. So I appreciate everybody who did join us for joining us. I want to thank y'all for tuning in to our, little post election conversation,
Yes.
and talking about all of the things that have transpired over the course of the last 7 days that felt like a month.
Yeah. And they still count.
Yeah. But I thank everybody for that. Again, if you watch it, like the video, share the video, comment. Again, we love all different groups, but we are trying to. This is a conversation where our specific group, as it pertains to politics, and again, reparations, I'll say, helps everybody.
It does.
When you talk about, ending prison labor that undermines the labor market overall, when you talk about putting in stipulations and regulations around those mechanisms that are used to exploit people as a whole in America, but those regulations or lack of regulations have been birthed out of consuming on the African American community.
Mhm.
So that helps everybody. And then even when you talk about, just setting a certain set of precedent, when we talk about reparations, those reparations can help Black people, quote unquote, Black all over the world in terms of their own individual claims as it pertains to quote unquote white supremacy.
Yeah, and I'll do you one even better. Black people, whether we realize it or not, we move industry out of our own poverty. We move industries. So imagine if out of our own poverty, we can go trending, we can create this, we can create all of these things out of our poverty and move so many industries that rely on eyeballs. Imagine if we infuse that with capital, what the possibilities are. Look at what we're doing in our poverty in terms of moving industry, moving entertainment, moving platforms that require a sustained amount of attention.
Mm-hmm.
How much of us we consume in everything that we encompass. Like even in the election, you had people that went out of their way to appeal to a black image.
Yeah.
So we move industry. Even across the river. I went to a restaurant the other day, K-pop. That is us. The world is moved through us. And imagine if we got just a small commitment today over the span of 50 years, infusion of reparations, what we can do. Because it's not as if we get capital and hoard it. We are America's greatest export. Look at any industry. When they need to market, who do they send? A black person.
And with that being said, we're gonna end the folks. We're gonna end the show tonight. And much love, much appreciation. Y'all enjoy the rest of y'all evening. Again, if you're still watching, please like the video, share the video, comment, and we thank you all for participating in another episode of Eavesdrop. Um, be safe.
Peace. Keep that mask on.
Yeah, and celebrate safely. Celebrate for like 2 days, and then